So what is a drawing without dimensions? Well, it'll just be a bunch of lines and circles maybe. But dimensioning a drawing properly is essential. There are many tools in AutoCAD to help us annotate our drawings. Dimensioning is the process of adding measurement annotation to a drawing. Let's open up the dimension example file. Here we just have a bunch of simple lines, a couple of circles, a little slot, and then different center lines to mark that area. We go to the dimensioning tab in the paper space tab here. We'll see different dimensions that we have already drawn in here. Now, there are a couple of different ways to create dimensions. If you go to the Home tab, you can get to the Dimension command right here. Now, to use that, let's click on the No Dim tab to get us to just the drawing. If you click this, it's very easy and very quick to make dimensions. Just select the line, and it automatically dimensions it, even if it's at an angle. Now, if it's a circle, it'll give you the radius. Same thing with an arc. Now, if you want to draw a dimension from point to point that's not specifically an object, just type in some O-snaps, END, for example, and we'll pick the endpoint of that line, and I'm going to make it perpendicular, PER, press enter, to this center line. So now we have the distance between the centers of these two circles. Now, another way to do that is to start the dimension command, type in CEN for center. That'll start the dimension from the center of that circle. Type in CEN again, press enter, and that will get us to the center of this circle, and it will draw it just the same way. Press enter when finished. Now, there are other dimension tools right here. If you click on this flyout, it'll give you access to all of the other dimension tools that you have. Now, the regular dimension tool is an automatic on the fly, kind of give you most of all of the dimension commands in one command. So you can just click it and kind of go. But sometimes it's hard to get to those. It's kind of tricky. And some of those might be like your aligned command right here. You use this dimension to go from point to point, and it'll give you a true length dimension from those 2 points. The angular dimension will give you the angle between two objects. Arc length will give you the true length of an arc. And then you have radius, diameter, ordinate dimensionings, and a jogged radius dimension. It'll just put a little jog in it for you once you have it drawn. So that's the gist of how to create a dimension. It's real quick and real simple. You can also go to the Annotate tab on the ribbon, and you can get to all of these and some other editing options that are available. And I'll go into those a little bit more in depth in a later section. But I want to describe to you and define some of the settings for dimensions. Now, a dimension can be either associative, non-associative, or exploded. An associative dimension will adjust to changes in geometric objects that they measure. So if I zoom in here and I double-click inside my viewport here to activate model space so I have access to my line, I'm going to select it and I'm going to move the line. An associated dimension will automatically adjust to that change in geometry. That's fantastic, because then you don't have to go back after you've changed the line and automatically change the dimension as well. That will save you a lot of time and effort. Now, a non-associative dimension won't be associated to a specific object. It just kind of goes to an arbitrary point to another arbitrary point. It's not tied to any object. So when you change the object, the dimension will have to be updated. That happens sometimes. Now, another type of dimension is an exploded dimension. If I type in X for the explode command, select this dimension, press enter, this object is no longer a dimension object. It is just a series of a few lines. This is the dimension line. This and this line here are both called extension lines. You have your arrowhead, which is just a shape, and then your text, which is now just a text object. If I select these dimensions, you can see there are objects. But if I select this, it's just the individual parts. It's no longer a dimension. Dimension associativity defines the relationship between your object and their dimension. Now, there are 3 types of associativity between geometric objects and dimensions. The associative dimensions are controlled by a setting in AutoCAD called DIM-ASSOC, or DIM-ASSOC. That's the system variable. Press enter, and it should be set to 2. This will associate your dimensions to the objects when you create them. Now, if it's set to 1, that will create non-associated dimensions. Your dimensions will still be dimension objects, they just won't be tied to any specific linear or geometric object. And if it's set to 0, then it will create all of your dimensions as exploded dimensions. Editing dimensions can be a bit tricky. If you want to just edit the text, type in ed, press enter, and select the text. You can make changes to it. So I can come in here and I can delete this, all that I want to, and I can type in any other number. Let's say 400 feet. When I'm finished, just click somewhere else. Now, that dimension is no longer accurate, so it would have to be redone. But because I exploded that, I can't. That's one of the problems with exploding dimensions. If I come into this object here, I see it's still my dimension object. I type in ed, press enter, and I select the text. I can delete that, what's there, and I can type in a different number. I can type in anything. It can be alpha, it can be numeric. When I change this dimension, that number stays the same. So if I want it back to the way it was to give me the absolute value or the actual value of that dimension, I can just delete the text, type in a less than, and then a greater than, and you'll see it's highlighted. That's the actual value of that dimension. So now if I change this dimension from point to point, you can see it automatically updates to what it needs to be. Now, if you want to edit these dimensions, you can do so very quickly just by selecting it and using the grips. You can move them up or down very quickly. You can grab the endpoints here and then snap them to a new spot, to a new location, or back again. If I click on the grip for the text, I can move it back and forth or to a new location altogether. And that's the quick and dirty how to create dimensions, how to edit them, and the difference between that settings. So if your dimensions are doing weird things, they're not following the objects along, try that dim associates settings, that DIM ASSOC, and make sure it's set to 2.